Hello again. I'm continuing to go over the basic skills test. I'm starting with number 9 on this one. This was a section about the properties, which seemed to be the most difficult part for a lot of people. I have decided that I'm going to test this differently on the next one, kind of redo the questions a little bit. I'm not as concerned with everyone knowing the names of the properties. I just want everyone to be clear with what the properties say. So that's kind of the biggest thing here. So I put this little table down here so you could see a description in words of what each of the properties is. So that's kind of, like I said, the most important thing, knowing what the properties say. So commutative property says changing the order of a number will not change the result. So this is true for multiplication and addition. So there's a commutative property of addition and commutative property of multiplication. Associative says changing the grouping of the numbers will not change the result. So if you look here, when you're looking at commutative and associative to figure out which is which, first of all, associative has to have parentheses on both sides, and commutative usually does not have parentheses. Associative has things in the same order, so if you look here on the left-hand side of the red, they have ABC, and on the right-hand side, they also have ABC. It's just that the different things are in the parentheses. So in one, it's BC, and in one, it's AB. So the associative property actually comes from the commutative property because it's just saying that if you have all the same operation, then for multiplication or addition, then you can add them in any order also. So you can group them differently, but it's all going to give you the same answer. Then on here we have identity. Okay, so identity is when you do something to a number and it doesn't change the number. So for addition, identity is 0 because that means adding 0 does not change the number. For multiplication, identity is 1 because multiplying anything by 1 does not change the number as well. So identity is when you begin and end with the same thing. So whatever you add or multiply does not change the value. So if you add 0, it's identity. If you multiply by 1, it's identity. Inverse is similar, somewhat similar to identity, but inverse is saying instead of like adding 0, your answer is 0. Instead of multiplying by 1, your answer is 1. So it's kind of, the inverse is kind of the inverse of the identity property, which that probably didn't make a lot of sense. But inverse says that if you just add the opposite to a number, it's going to equal 0. And if you multiply by a number by 1 over that number, then it's going to equal 1. So this was actually, I think the one that was there was 2 times 1/2 equals 1. And then we have distributive. And I think everyone should be familiar with distributive because distributives we use pretty frequently with actually using the distributive property and evaluating something. So distributive is the only one of the ones here that has both multiplication and addition. So that's how you can kind of tell distributive property. All right, so looking at these answer choices, or actually at the given statements and then trying to find the answers. So at number 9, if I look at the left side of the equation and then the right side of the equation, I look at what changed. Well, all I did was flip the order, okay? And going back to that, flipping the order, adding in any order being the same thing, is commutative property. So this one was B. Number 9 was B. For number 10, we have 13 plus a negative 13 equals 0. So adding the opposite gives us equals 0. So this is, you added the inverse, all right? So this is the inverse property. So this is the inverse property because negative 13 is the inverse. So you added the inverse. Number 11, this is where I said if you start and end with the same number, it's your identity property. So I started with negative 12. I ended with negative 12. I added 0, which did not change anything. So that is the identity property, E. And then, so 11 was the identity property for addition. And then 12 is actually the identity property for multiplication because, again, we started and ended with the same thing. We started with 15, we multiplied it by 1, which did not change anything. So that is identity. So we started and ended with the same thing again. So this also is identity. And then the last one, instead of multiplying by 1, we ended with 1. So we multiplied 1/2 by 2. So 1/2 times 2 is just 1. So if we ended with 1, then that again is our inverse property. So this is inverse of multiplication. We saw in number 11, we saw inverse of addition. Now number 13 is inverse of multiplication. So this one is D as well. So there actually was not any associative or distributive on here, just because I thought distributive was probably the easiest for you to recognize, and I think everyone's pretty familiar with that. And then associative is kind of harder to recognize, and it doesn't factor into what we do as much. I think these three are kind of the most important for our purposes. But again, I'm changing the way I'm going to ask the property questions in the future. So I'm not as much concerned with the name of the property. I'm concerned with knowing what the property says. So that's where I stand on that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and then I will make a new one for the next part.